Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th Canto, 5th chapter, text 35. It's the last verse in the chapter, but that's where we left off last time. So this last verse about Lord Vyāsadev's handing his kingdom over, the incarnation of Godhead, Lord Vyāsadeva handing the kingdom over to his sons, who are qualified devotees of the Lord to lead and manage nicely. And this last chapter, chapter 5, has been his instructions to his son, which the essence of the instructions is to lead the people toward devotional service. Sometimes it has to be done gradually and with what appears to be indirectly, in other words, encouraging citizens to serve in the mood of devotion without disturbing their normal days, normal way of doing things. And then other times more directly, by direct instruction from great saints and sages. But the essence is to lead in such a way that the citizens have the opportunity to make advancement in devotional service. And Lord Vyāsadeva himself, after giving up the management position, assumed the life of an avadut who had no identification whatsoever with the material body, none. And in that condition, he appeared not to be taking care of his body very nicely. And there was a lot of ridicule by the lower class of individuals who completely identify, in other words, the animalistic men completely identify with the body. So he, in his final stage, he assumed the way of living of a python, where he just lay in one spot, not caring about his body, and actually eating, sleeping, passing stool, all in the same spot. And then his body actually became covered with his own stool. But that stool was not ordinary stool. It was so fragrant, because of the purity of the Lord. It was so fragrant that for 80 miles, I think, the wonderful fragrance filled the neighboring area. And then there was some discussion about how the cow, their stool and dung is also pure. It's actually antiseptic. And like that. So once off the bodily platform, things change quite a bit. As they say, things aren't what they appear to be. Isn't that the nature of illusion? So this is text 35, last text in the chapter. And, O King Parikshit, just to show all the yogis the mystic process, Lord Vyāsadeva, the partial expansion of Lord Krishna, performed wonderful activities. Actually, he was the master of liberation and was fully absorbed in transcendental bliss, which increased 1,000-fold. Lord Krishna, Vasudeva, son of Vasudeva, is the original source of Lord Rishabhdev. There's no difference in their constitution, and consequently Lord Rishabhdev awakened the loving symptoms of crying, laughing, and shivering. He was always absorbed in transcendental love. Due to this, all mystic powers automatically approached him, such as the ability to travel in outer space at the speed of mind, to appear and disappear, to enter the bodies of others, and to see things far, far away. Although he could do all this, he did not exercise these powers. Prabhupada's commentary. In Chaitanya Charitamrita it is said, Krishna Bhakta Nishkama Aitava Ashanta Bhakti Mukti Siddhi Kame Sakala Ashanta. The word Shanta means completely peaceful. Unless all one's desires are fulfilled, one cannot be peaceful. Everyone's trying to fulfill his aspirations and desires, be they material or spiritual. Those in the material world are ashanta, without peace, because they have so many desires to fulfill. The pure devotee, however, is without desire, anyabalasita sunya. A pure devotee is completely free from all kinds of material desires. Karmis, on the other hand, are simply full of desires because they try to enjoy sense gratification. They're not peaceful in this life, nor the next, during the past, present, or future. Similarly, jnanis are always aspiring after liberation and trying to become one with the Supreme. And yogis are aspiring after many siddhis, powers, like anima, lagima, prapti, and so on. However, a devotee is not at all interested in these things because he's fully dependent on the mercy of Krishna. Krishna is Yogeshwar, the possessor of all mystic powers, siddhis, and he is Atmarama, fully self-satisfied. The yoga siddhis are described in this verse. One can fly in outer space without the aid of a machine. He can travel at the speed of mind. This means, as soon as a yogi desires to go somewhere within this universe, or even beyond this universe, he can do so immediately. One cannot estimate the speed of mind, for within a second the mind can go many millions of miles. Similarly, yogis enter into the bodies of other people and act as they desire when their bodies are not working properly. When the body becomes old, a perfect yogi can find a young, able body. Giving up his old body, the yogi can enter into the young body and act as he pleases. Being a plenary expansion of Lord Vāsadeva, Lord Rishabhdev possessed all these mystic yoga powers, but he was satisfied with his devotional love for Krishna, which was evinced by ecstatic symptoms such as crying, laughing, and shivering. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 5th canto, 5th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Lord Rishabhdev Teaching to His Sons. About the yogis being able to do all these wonderful feats, they can act on the subtle plane. Although they are in the material body, they can act on the subtle level of mind. And that is not spiritual. That is just very, very subtle. So there's still birth, death, old age, and disease. And there's still karma, because acting on the material platform. And so although these powers seem very impressive, and sometimes we hear in society at large discussion of these things as if they were spiritual. Oh, the spirits. They're not spiritual. They're on the astral plane, the mental plane. And they're very, very subtle activities. The yogis have learned how to do these things, but they're not spiritual. Spiritual means devotional service to the Lord. It means beyond material, either physical, gross physical, fruit of activity, or mental, subtle activity, the subtle body. And that's where Lord Rishabhdev was manifesting his pastimes, was in the devotional platform. And there are symptoms of pure love. Crying and laughing. And shivering.
Call from 86.
So this is chapter 6. And there's a little summary here that will tell what's discussed in the chapter. This chapter tells how Lord Rishabhdev left his body. He was not attached to his body even when it was being burnt up in a forest fire. When the seed or fruit of activity is burned by the fire of knowledge, the spiritual properties and mystic powers are automatically manifest. Yet, Bhakti Yoga is not affected by these mystic powers. An ordinary yogi is captivated by mystic powers and his progress checked. Therefore, a perfect yogi does not welcome them. Because the mind is restless and undependable, it must remain always under control. Even the mind of the advanced yogi, Sabari, created such a disturbance that he lost his yogic mystic powers. Due to a restless mind, even a very advanced yogi can fall down. The mind is so restless that it induces even a perfect yogi to be controlled by the senses. Therefore, Lord Rishabhdev, for the instruction of all yogis, showed the process of quitting the body. While traveling in South India, through the provinces of Karnataka, Kanka, Venka, and Kutika, Lord Rishabhdev arrived in the neighborhood of Kutakachala. Suddenly there was a forest fire that burned the forest, and Lord Rishabhdev's body to ashes. The pastimes of Lord Rishabhdev as a liberated soul were known by the king of Kanka, Venika, and Kutika. The king's name was Arhat. He later became captivated by the illusory energy, and in this condition, he set forth the basic principles of Jainism. Lord Rishabhdev set forth the principles of religion that can be free from material bondage, and he put an end to all kinds of atheistic activities. On this earth, the place known as Bharatavarsa was a very pious land, because the Supreme Lord appeared there when he wanted to incarnate. Lord Rishabhdev neglected all the mystic powers for which the so-called yogis hanker. Because of the beauty of devotional service, devotees are not at all interested in so-called mystic power. The master of all yogic power is Lord Krishna, and can exhibit all powers on behalf of his devotees. Devotional service is more valuable than yogic mystic powers. Devotees who are sometimes misled aspire for liberation and mystic powers. The Supreme Lord gives these devotees whatever they desire, but they cannot attain the most important function of devotional service. Devotional service to the Lord is guaranteed for those who do not desire liberation and mystic power. Text 1. King Parikshit asked Sukadeva Goswami, "My dear Lord, for those who are completely pure in heart, knowledge is attained by practice of bhakti yoga, and attachment for fruitive activity is completely burnt to ashes. For such people, the powers of mystic yoga automatically arise. They do not cause distress. Why then did Rishabhdev neglect them?" Prabhupada's commentary. A pure devotee is constantly engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Whatever is necessary for the discharge of devotional service is automatically attained, though it may appear to be the result of mystic yoga power. Sometimes a yogi displays a little yogic power by manufacturing gold, A little quantity of gold captures foolish people, and thus the yogi gets many followers who are willing to accept such a tiny person as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such a yogi may also advertise himself as Bhagavan. However, a devotee does not have to exhibit such magical wonders. Without practicing the mystic yoga process, he achieves even greater opulence all over the world. Under the circumstances, Lord Vyāsadeva refused to manifest mystic yogic perfections, and Maharaj Parikshit asked why he did not accept them, since for a devotee they're not at all disturbing. A devotee is never distressed or satisfied by material opulence. His concern is how to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If, by the grace of the Supreme Lord, a devotee achieves extraordinary opulence, he utilizes the opportunity for the Lord's service. He's not disturbed by the opulence. It's not a matter of false renunciation for devotional service. It's a matter of using whatever Krishna supplies in the Lord's service. Some devotees, they may be disturbed by opulence. Their devotional service may be disturbed because of the glitter and the opportunity for sense gratification that opulence can put there. And so someone like that, the Lord may withhold opulence for their benefit, so they're not distracted. But if a devotee is completely surrendered to the Lord's lotus feet, then although they may be in a very opulent situation, it holds no attraction for them. Their attraction is in the Transcendental Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that opulence can be used in service of the Lord. So it's not that a devotee is always poor. Like we see that with Pundarik Vijayanidhi in Chaitanya Lila. He was very, very opulent, and he was living opulently too. And I believe it was Gadadhar Pandit, the Lord Chaitanya, Krishna Chaitanya, and Krishna in his incarnation as Lord Chaitanya. Gadadhar Pandit wanted to learn and hear Bhagavatam from a devotee, and the Lord sent him to Pundarik Vijayanidhi. And the first time he saw Pundarik Vijayanidhi, didn't even look like a devotee. He was so absorbed in what appeared to be an opulent situation. I think I have this pastime correct. I may not, but I'll do what I can with it. I have to read it again to get it quite right. But the idea, or the essence, is that devotee is not sometimes recognizable simply by their situation within the world. They are acting according to how they're situated, but they're always thinking of Krishna and engaged on a spiritual platform in hearing, chanting, remembering, offering prayers, worshiping, serving the lotus feet, serving the Lord, making friends with the Lord, and offering everything, their very self to the Lord, because that is devotional service. And then what the Lord is supplying in terms of economics, social strata, family life or no family life, whatever is being supplied, that is the that is just the material platform. And as long as one has the material body, then they will be active to one degree or another on the material platform. But without attachment, in a detached way. In other words, home is where the heart is. Sometimes it's said that the gopis, the most intimate, loving servants of the Lord, who all their natural instincts were completely surrendered to the Lord, they would be going about their household duties, but they would always be thinking of Krishna. They would be always absorbed in Krishna. And that is highly recommended by the great saints and sages, to have that kind of consciousness. I think Prabhupada also instructed a disciple, Bhaktivedanta Swami instructed a disciple one time. The disciple said that he was having trouble controlling his desires, living renounced like a brahmachari. He wanted a home, and he wanted a family and a companion, a wife, and basically sex life. And so Prabhupada was sitting near a window, and he opened the curtain to the window, and it was a busy street. A lot of people were walking. He said, "Oh, you want a wife? Okay, pick one. Pick a wife. You have a wife, you make a life. But remember, love is for Krishna." So these things are practical for a yogi or a devotee, a bhakti yogi. They accept whatever is favorable for controlling the mind and the senses. Remain steady and detached. So it's different for different individuals. And that's Rupa Goswami's instruction. Always accept everything favorable for Krishna consciousness and reject everything unfavorable. So if these yogic cities, flying in the air and producing gold, entering into the body of someone else to try to enjoy, which I think ghosts also can do that because they function on the mental platform, subtle platform also. They don't have a body, gross body. All they have is a subtle body. So when they want to try to enjoy grossly, they disturb someone else, enter into their... So all done on the mental platform. But it's not imaginary. These are actual living entities. It's not imaginary. It's not hallucinatory in that sense. These are living entities. They inhabit the mental platform, subtle platform. So if those things aren't favorable for Krishna consciousness, Vyāsadeva is showing who needs it. Not necessary. But there are people who are impressed by these things. Unfortunately, they miss the real opportunity to transcend completely. Text 2. Sukadeva Goswami replied, "My dear king, you have spoken correctly. However, after capturing animals, a cunning hunter does not put faith in them, for they might run away. Similarly, those who are advanced in spiritual life do not put faith in the mind. Indeed, they always remain vigilant and watch the mind's action." Oh boy. This is good, hearing about how the mind functions and what to do about it. If you can get to the point you can actually hear your mind, that's half the battle. If we become conscious of how the mind drags us here and there, then we stand a good chance, because right there's some element of detachment, to become conscious of the mind's activities. And then with the intelligence, and the intelligence is coming from Krishna. He says, I'm the source of knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. So Krishna is the source of the intelligence. So Krishna gives good intelligence how to deal with the mind. It's very active, very, very active, the mind. We just learned that the mind can travel to another universe in a few seconds. This is very fast. And here, Sukadeva is comparing the mind to a captured animal. So even if we think we've got the mind under control, we don't let the guard down for 1 second. And don't put any faith in the mind. Put the faith in Krishna. And that's done through the devotional process. The devotional process is what attracts Krishna. And Krishna gives the good intelligence to control the mind. So it always comes back to devotion. The spirit of devotion is the true spirit. It's not illusory. It's the eternal nature of the Lord is devotion, devotional service. Prabhupada's commentary. Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance are not to be given up, but should be performed. Indeed, sacrifice, charity, and penance purify even the great souls. Even one who has renounced the world and has taken sannyas should not renounce chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Renunciation does not mean that one has to renounce Sankirtan Yagna. Similarly, one should not renounce charity or tapasya. The yoga system for controlling the mind and senses must be strictly followed. Lord Vyāsadeva showed how severe types of tapasya could be performed. He set an example for all others. Should not renounce chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, because that is the sacrifice for the age. That's the sacrifice that we perform now. It's the Harinam Sankirtan. It's not that one gets to such a level of transcendence that they don't chant. No, what happens is the chanting becomes more and more relishable. Because the Lord is making himself available in the chanting. So we're not chanting for anything material. The chanting itself is devotional service. And the Lord has arranged it that way, so merciful, that chanting Hare Krishna is devotional service. It's not to get something, like abracadabra. If the only thing to get by chanting is more and more appreciation of chanting, more and more taste in chanting. If someone wants to get something from chanting, that's what to get. It's not to get free from sins. It doesn't happen like that. Because by engaging in devotional service under the direction of the devotee, because that's where the devotion comes from, it comes through the devotee. So by taking shelter of the devotee and receiving the Hare Krishna mantra from the pure devotee, then they are free from sinful reaction, because they're engaging on the devotional platform, which means karma is finished. And they're certainly not causing any new karmic reactions by acting on the devotional platform. It is said that there may be some reactions from past activity that will come forward and cause a little disturbance, but it'll be in a very reduced way. It won't be devastating. It'll be a slight reaction coming from some past activity, but it will be easily dealt with, because if a person is on the devotional platform, they have Krishna's protection, so they can deal with it, whatever it is. It will pretty much be like water on a duck's back. It may cause a slight disturbance, but water on a duck's back. So that's how powerful devotional service is. And this chanting, Hare Krishna, is devotional service to the Lord. Okay, text 3. All the learned scholars have given their opinion. The mind is by nature very restless. One should not make friends with it. If we place full confidence in the mind, it may cheat us at any moment. Even Lord Shiva became agitated upon seeing Mohini Murti form of Lord Krishna. And Sobari Muni also fell down from the mature stage of yogic perfection. So those are both references to sexual agitation. So the sex desire is the strongest of the sense desires. It's very, very strong. And in both those incidents, the mind could not deal with sexual agitation, and they were dragged down into material senses, material mode. So one should not put their faith in the mind. But then we have the example of Haridas Thakur, who was also presented with face-to-face some sexual provocation alone in a solitary place. But because his mind was controlled by devotional service to the Lord, he wasn't forced into on the gross material plane or the subtle material plane. He remained situated in transcendence. And even more than that, the provocateur gave up their provoking activities and also became situated on the devotional platform. They became Krishna conscious, devotional service, through the association of the pure devotee. That's how powerful devotional service is. The first business of Prabhupada's commentary, the first business of one trying to advance in spiritual life is to control the mind and senses. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Mamai-vamsa jivaloke jiva-bhuta sanatana manakshashtindriyani prakriti-stani kashati. Although the living entities are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord and are therefore in a transcendental position, they're still suffering in this material world and struggling for existence due to the mind and the senses. To get out of this false struggle for existence, become happy in the material world, one has to control the mind and senses and be detached from material conditions. One should never neglect austerities and penances. One should always perform them, and Lord Vyāsadeva personally showed us how to do this. One comment, it's Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that he is sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles, which means that not acting in a lustful way. So it's not that, for a devotee there's no eating, or there's no hearing nice music, or there's nothing beautiful to look at. It's not like that. It's that the objects of the senses are engaged in a purified way, so that the lust is not there. And the lust is what binds the living entity to the material conception. Lust has such a buzz to it that it bewilders the mind and the memory and the intelligence of the living being. It's like being stung by a poisonous snake. Sometimes the senses are compared to venomous serpents, being stung by them, and going to like a comatose state. So sex life which is not contrary to religious principles, which means in marriage, producing nice children, everything is very good, because the lust factor is not there. But it's in hearing music, beautiful devotional songs, and sitar and tabla to glorify Krishna, and dancing, and there's culture. But everything is directed toward the personality of Godhead. And so the dangers of identification with the material body and the material senses are not, the danger has been removed. So one should never neglect austerities and penances. One should always perform them. Lord Vyāsadeva personally showed us how to do this. In Bhagavatam, it's specifically stated, a grihasta, vanaprastha, sannyasi, and brahmachari should be very careful when associating with women. One is forbidden to sit down in a solitary place, even with one's mother, sister, or daughter. In our Krishna consciousness movement, it has been very difficult to disassociate ourselves from women in our society, especially in the Western countries. We are therefore sometimes criticized. But nonetheless, we are trying to give everyone a chance to chant the Hare Krishna mantra and thus advance spiritually. If we stick to the principle of chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra offenselessly, then by the grace of Srila Haridas Thakur, we may be saved from the allurement of women. However, if we're not very strict in chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, we may at any time fall victim to women. So when Prabhupada says women here, he means, when he says victim to women, that means specifically victim to lusty desires, to enjoy sex, lusty desires. And Prabhupada quotes here about Haridas Thakur, who gave us that, he manifested that example, that by strictly chanting Hare Krishna, then there will be no victimization. Because in this culture, in this Western culture especially, the men and the women, they mix very freely. And the whole air is saturated with this intermingling. So to avoid that is really, especially trying to spread Krishna consciousness, you're going to come in contact with it. So by taking shelter of strictly following and chanting the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, then Krishna will protect the devotees. But that has to be done strictly. Hearing nicely. And always taking shelter of the pure devotee. Text 4. An unchaste woman is very easily carried away by paramours, and it sometimes happens that her husband is violently killed by her paramours. If the yogi gives his mind a chance and does not restrain it, his mind will give facility to enemies like lust, anger, greed, and they will undoubtedly kill the yogi. Prabhupada's commentary. In this verse, the word pumshali refers to a woman who is easily carried away by men. Such a woman is never to be trusted. Unfortunately, in the present age, women are never controlled. According to the directions of the Shastras, women are never to be given freedom. When a child, we have to say something here because this sounds very draconian. In this culture, this Western culture, to say something like that is very easily misunderstood. When Prabhupada says women are never to be given freedom, he doesn't mean freedom to pursue spiritual life, because that is the real freedom. And he doesn't mean that they're kept like slaves. He doesn't mean that. He means freedom to roam like without any control, which is not good for anyone. So the type of freedom that a woman is given is she's given freedom by being protected. She's protected so that she can't be victimized, carried off by unscrupulous men, whatever. So that's what he means by freedom, because actually, if you want to consider it, no one is free. There's no such thing as freedom. The only freedom that's there is freedom of choice. What do I choose? Do I choose spiritual life? Do I choose animal life? Do I choose to follow my senses and identify with my body? Or do I choose to hear from self-realized souls about transcendence? That's really the only freedom. So when they say women are never given freedom, that's not the kind of freedom that they're not given. The kind of freedom Prabhupada is talking about here is freedom to be exploited, freedom to be pulled here and there by the senses, which isn't really freedom anyway. That's actually bondage. So when Prabhupada says women are never to be given freedom, what he means is women are never allowed to fall into bondage. That's really what he's saying. We'll continue on with what he's saying. When a child, a woman must be strictly controlled by her father. When she is young, she must be strictly controlled by her husband. When she is old, she must be controlled by her elderly sons. If she's given independence and allowed to mingle unrestrictedly with men, she will be spoiled. A spoiled woman, being manipulated by paramours, might even kill her husband. This example is given here because a yogi desiring to get free from material conditions must always keep his mind under control. So comparison is being made here between the mind and the woman. So an uncontrolled mind is like an uncontrolled woman or a prostitute, just going here and there to satisfy whatever. That is actual bondage. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur used to say that in the morning, our first business should be to beat the mind with a shoe 100 times. Before going to bed, to beat the mind 100 times with a broomstick. In this way, one's mind can be kept under control. An uncontrolled mind and an unchaste wife are the same. An unchaste wife can kill her husband at any time. And an uncontrolled mind, followed by lust, anger, greed, madness, envy, and illusion, can certainly kill a yogi. When the yogi is controlled by the mind, he falls down into material condition. One should be very careful of the mind, just as the husband should be very careful of an unchaste wife. This happens all the time. You see women, they kill their children because the children is an encumbrance to running off with the latest man that has come onto the scene. We see that. I mean, these things are in the news all the time. Can kill her children, her own children she can kill, because it looks like the children are getting in the way of this new affair. So the mind is like that. It's very dangerous. Or she can kill her husband, get him out of the way. And maybe he has an insurance policy to boot. This is the nature of lust, greed, envy, illusion, madness. All kinds of things can be done. This is madness. This is what happens when the mind is allowed free rein, so-called freedom. So, text 5. Oh, this is so good hearing about the mind. Hare Krishna. The mind is the root cause of lust, anger, pride, greed, lamentation, illusion, and fear. Combined, these constitute bondage to fruit of activity. What learned man would put his faith in the mind? Prabhupada's commentary. The mind is the original cause of material bondage. It's followed by many enemies, such as anger, pride, greed, lamentation, illusion, and fear. The best way to control the mind is to engage it always in Krishna consciousness. Savai mana Krishna padaravindaya. Since the followers of the mind bring about material bondage, we should be very careful not to trust the mind. Text 6. Lord Vyāsadeva was the head of all kings and emperors within this universe, but, assuming the dress and language of an avadut, he acted as if dull and materially bound. Consequently, no one could observe his divine opulence. He adopted this behavior just to teach yogis how to give up the body. Nonetheless, he maintained his original position as a plenary expansion of Lord Vyāsadeva, Krishna. Remaining always in that state, he gave up his pastimes as Lord Vyāsadeva within the material world. If, following in the footsteps of Lord Vyāsadeva, one can give up his subtle body, there's no chance that one will accept a material body again. So, it's more than just not trusting the mind, it's also not identifying with the mind, because the mind is the subtle body. Mind, intelligence, and false ego is a subtle material body. So that also has to be given up. And the way, what's given up is not the mind, intelligence, and ego. That remains. What's given up is identifying with material activities of the mind, intelligence, and ego. The material identification is what's given up. And the way that's given up is by identifying with the spiritual body, which is what is being formed. In Krishna consciousness, we're actually growing and forming a spiritual body. Just like we grow and form a material body through our desires. But when our desires are purified by hearing about Krishna from pure devotee of the Lord, then we begin to desire to serve Krishna, and that service, that desire to serve Krishna, we begin to form our spiritual body, and our spiritual mind, and our spiritual intelligence, free from identification with a material mind, material intelligence, material gross body. Lord Vyāsadeva was the head. Oh, okay, we read that. Jai. And then there's no chance that one will accept a material body again. As Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tatpataha chakva deha puna janma naiti mamiti sorjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. This is possible simply by keeping oneself an eternal servant of the Supreme Lord. One must understand his constitutional position and the constitutional position of the Supreme Lord as well. Both have the same spiritual identity. Maintaining oneself as a servant of the Supreme Lord, one should avoid rebirth in this material world. If one keeps himself spiritually fit and thinks of himself as an eternal servant of the Supreme Lord, he will be successful at the time he has to give up the material body. So giving up the material body means getting the spiritual body. That is the actual eternal position. Simply giving up the material body and just sort of existing in some kind of non-differentiated state as spirit is not only not very attractive, it's kind of like suicide for a living being who remains active and has a desire to enjoy. So the actual eternal position of the living being is to give up the material body and begin activity on the spiritual plane in the spiritual body. Prabhupada says here, if one keeps himself spiritually fit, thinks of himself as an eternal servant of the Supreme Lord, he will be successful at the time he has to give up the material body. There's the real function of the mind. Thinks of himself as eternal servant of the Supreme Lord. And what's the alternative to that? Thinks of oneself as a material body and material senses and try to enjoy on that platform. That's guaranteed another birth. But if one thinks of oneself as an eternal servant of Krishna, supreme spiritual being. See, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, whatever the mind is fixed on or thinks of at the time of death, that state the living entity attains. without fail. So here's the mind. It's so important to hear about Krishna, chant about Krishna, begin to identify with spirit, not matter, as a servant of Krishna. And one of the best ways to serve Krishna is to chant and to glorify Krishna, to hear from pure devotees and to hear from the Lord about Krishna. And then the devotional service is to chant about Krishna. In that way, mind is fixed on Krishna. The tongue is controlled. The tongue wants to taste and vibrate. So accepting foodstuffs as Krishna's mercy, Krishna's prasad, and using the tongue to speak about Krishna, the ears to hear about Krishna, the eyes to see the beautiful form of Krishna as the deity. Like this. Fix the mind on Krishna. Text 7. Actually, Lord Vyāsadeva had no material body. But due to Yoga Maya, he considered his body material. And therefore, because he played like an ordinary human being, he gave up the mentality of identifying with it. Okay, so Krishna does things like this. He acts a certain way, but it doesn't mean he isn't Krishna. I'm going to read that sentence again. It's so wonderful. Actually, Lord Vyāsadeva had no material body. But due to Yoga Maya, he considered his body material. And therefore, because he played like an ordinary human being, he gave up the mentality of identifying with it. He never was a material body to begin with, but to perform this pastime, to manifest these things, he allowed Yoga Maya to allow him to think that he was a material body. And then he played like he was giving up a material body. He was never material to begin with. One thing is, Krishna's very playful. Following this principle, he began to wander all over the world. While traveling, he came to the province of Karnataka in South India and passed through Konka, Venka, and Kutika. He had no plan to travel this way, but he arrived near Kutakachala and entered a forest there. He placed stones within his mouth, began to wander through the forest naked, with his hair disheveled like a madman. So we'll stop there. And Hare Krishna. We'll see what the day's activities bring and how we can meet the challenges and perform what we need to perform and do what we need to do. But keep the mind fixed on Krishna. And then in the evening, we'll be able to, again, hear and chant about Krishna. So in this way, we can feel not so fearful of what the day might bring, because we know in the evening we're again going to be able to engage directly in devotional service, even though during the day there may be some indirect activities. We perform our indirect activities in the mood of devotion. We pray for that the activities are a little indirect, but we have to stay in the mood of devotion to Krishna. Offer our activities, all our activities, in devotion to Krishna. And do the needful, what we need to do to maintain ourselves, our family members, and so on. And then in the evening, we have that. We know that we will be able to engage directly in Krishna's service by hearing and chanting. So that should help stay afloat during the day. Hare Krishna.